ruddy and unattractive, yet I detect a nobility of attitude and unwavering loyalty, much like the Saint Bernard.
But note the eyes.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and every once in a while, my good friend from over on Comics by Perch drops by the channel. We like to talk, industry strategies, maybe industry trends and things like this. And today I have a list that I'm going to present to my good friend Perch, and we're going to talk about it. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Yeah, so these are, in my opinion, the 6 most interesting, developments that are going on in the comic book industry, moving out to 2020, for viewers to keep an eye on and kind of see where they go. The list did change a little bit recently, so I will talk about the first interesting development I see happening. How much influence does Brian Michael Bendis lose with Dan DiDio's firing at DC Comics?
Yeah, I mean, it's a story that's going to be on a lot of people's minds this year. Dan DiDio was the man who largely recruited Bendis into DC. He gave him a lot of platform and obviously weight within the company to do a lot of stories and things that he wanted to do. DiDio was a big Bendis supporter, and it was a big gamble on DiDio's part. I mean, the argument is that gamble actually hurt DiDio quite a bit in ultimately losing his job. So yeah, I think this is a wonderful story to watch, and it's going to be fascinating as we go into the summer. Death Metal is going to get a big splash with Scott Snyder. Bendis is there in the background. So what happens next? What is Bendis's big splash?
Looking out into the solicitations, I believe in March, I think Bendis was responsible for 20% of all DC Comics. And I think maybe in April, it was going to go up to 25%. That's a lot. And he had built a pipeline, some of his other creators. We've had Matt Fraction arrive, Kelly Sue DeConnick arrive, G. Willow Wilson arrive. We got, Cena Grace writing at DC Comics. Amy Reeder's coming over and doing an Amethyst, miniseries. So he was bringing in a lot of talents, and his influence was really growing by leaps and bounds really fast. Just really interesting stuff, in my opinion.
It is. It is, and I think that part of the company is the most interesting part. A lot of people are worried about the future of DC and what it means, and fear, and is the whole company in jeopardy and everything else. That's going way too far. But what is very interesting is how DC ultimately restructures, what kind of core platform they get to, and what place Bendis has in it. His Superman has not proven to be the iconic great take that either fans want or I suspect many in upper management wanted. So with the company trying to create more synergy with their media division and movies and everything else, how does Bendis fit into that? So I think it's interesting. I think he will lose influence. Absolutely. The question is how much.
Yeah, because the sales just aren't there, with him or the people that he brought over. But we've discussed that one. Let's move on to what I think is the second most interesting development, to monitor throughout 2020, and that is what impact will IDW Media's restructure have on the publishing division. We know they've lost massive amounts of money. They are holding a tremendous amount of debt for that company. They're really, betting on some streaming shows that they've helped fund and put out on Netflix. And we talked about this recently, but how is this going to affect the publishing division? Because they're going to have to make some changes in 2020.
Well, they are, and I think if I'm IDW right now, I'm looking at the TKO model or some of these other smaller companies that are changing the way they're doing print runs to really align it with streaming services or selling it off to films. IDW's licensing of comics just hasn't taken. The value of those properties is not as big as I think IDW hoped. And then simultaneously, their own properties have not been picked up as strong as they'd like. That's the situation they find themselves in. So I think they're headed for a fork in the road. They've got to go one direction or the other. I mean, frankly, I think as a licensing company, Hasbro and some of these others are going to start looking at IDW as not having the influence to carry those brands forward like they need to. So I think they're going to invariably be forced into pushing their own properties and really trying to make this streaming thing work. But they're going to have to do it in a much more limited, much more tactical scale. And so I think it will be very interesting. It not only is it on IDW, but the comic industry in general. A lot of people are going to be looking at what's going on with these guys. Can they make it work? Is this route of comics to shows, comics to media, is it a reality? Because everyone, I mean, including the big guys, are playing that game right now. So I think a lot of eyes are going to be on IDW.
People might not realize it. IDW puts out, I believe, the fourth, most comic books on the market right now. So if they were to, to cease operations, or maybe they scaled it back, 20 to 30% to coincide with this restructure for IDW Media, it could have a really big effect, on the overall industry. There will be people out of jobs.
There will, and I think it is when you talk about consolidation of comics, you talk about things closing or moving down. It's going to be stuff like this. It's we have almost every company, including DC, but not Marvel, saying that there are just too many comics on the shelves right now. There's just too much volume. Everybody has said that in one form or another, and so consolidation is coming, and that is going to mean less work. It is going to mean less jobs. It's going to mean less risky bets, and that's going to be very weird for the comic industry to consume, because a lot of the long tail content is what a lot of the kind of indie publishers and other people get really excited about. But there's just the money's not there for it.
So, you just mentioned Marvel. They're my number 3 development to watch in 2020. Will Marvel Comics continue bringing back top flight writing and art talent, throughout 2020? We've got Jonathan Hickman on X-Men. We've got Larry Hama coming back, for a short run on Albert and LCD with the Iron Man 2020 event. We got Fabian Nicienza coming back to do a Juggernaut event. Right now, Garth Ennis is writing a damn Punisher book. I love it. Having all these great writers come back. Gleason moved over to Marvel Comics. They're bringing some of their really good art talent back as well. Do you see Marvel Comics continuing to increase the quality of their writers and artists in 2020?
Yeah, I do. I think they'll do it in a very tactical way. I think that what we're seeing at Marvel, when you, like 5 years from now, when we look back and look at the long picture, we'll see that this particular moment in Marvel's history, starting about a year ago, a little more than that, it was them doing their own version of kind of pulling back, of bringing really kind of some top talent into some very specific projects, mainly on the writing side. But they're going to just start to collect these very precise, very tactical runs of books with people that are considered safe bets, or people who have done runs that have been adopted to movies and shows in the past. The Juggernaut is a good example of that. I mean, that is, in my mind, a feeder book that is going on, where a run's going to be done, it's going to be tested, it's going to be looked at as something to be translated into films, because the writer's work has been translated to films before. So they're going to be making more of these kind of safe bet items. I think art is going to be the one that comes along last. For whatever reason, Marvel still views the writer much stronger than the artist. They would never admit this in public, but it's just clear in the decisions they make. And they need to kind of get to that prestige artist in addition to the prestige writer, I think, to really make this all work. It's amazing that there's a lot of good stories that come out that could be great movies, but with a poor artist on it, it just doesn't get the traction, the attention. So Marvel has run with the strategy of having a really nice cover artist and in the attempt to kind of hook people in. But I think that game is almost up. People know it now. So it's, they're going to have to work on the art side as well as the writer side.
So, yeah, I did want to talk about the art as well, because it's a little bit different run in that respect on how they're developing that. So they've got their Young Guns, panel where I guess they bring in what they consider to be the best up and coming talent and they try to develop them. And a couple of years ago, and it just really hit. They had Marco Cicchetto, Russell Dowderman. I believe R.B. Silva was in that class, and I think maybe even Pepe Larraz was in there as well. Yeah. And they've got some fantastic artists right now. But what Marvel likes to do, because I think it is because of the Image 7 leaving all at once. They don't like to let their artists become superstars, so they kind of just shuffle them around on series, and they never really let them get a big long run where you go, that guy is a great X-Men artist. And I really hope that they kind of pull back the reins on that and let somebody like Cicchetto or Pepe Larraz or Russell Dowderman, some of these really good new artists, get a great run and really establish a name.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Marvel has tried to kind of grow their own talents with the Young Guns program and other things and bringing some people up. And I think that's been successful for them. I think the next step is to say, all right, here's a handful of very prestige titles. We think these are kind of shoe-ins for being movies someday, and we really want to make a big push of them. So we're going to bring back the Art Adams or the John Burns or the whoever it might be, the classic J. Scott Campbell to do a full issue, which would be very expensive. In some cases, not what the artist is interested in of doing a full book. But if you're talking about a kind of a shoe-in graphic novel that's going to go on the shelves that they want to use to connect to a movie or anything else, I think you have those classic artists. At the same time, just as you said, they have to continue their Young Guns program, and they continue to bring people up and harness that talent. Marvel's kind of suffering, I think, right now for having a good artist recruiter, if you will. C.B. Swolsky has done that in the past, but they don't have that kind of go-to person to really hunt out great art like they have in other eras.
Interesting development. Definitely want to keep an eye on that. The last big two topic, really, the next thing that I think we should all be watching, in 2020, are DC fans going to jump ship after Death Metal? You're the Villain has not been the windfall that DC Comics, I think, had expected. I don't really see any series sales bump after this. Batman, Superman, and Hello Risen sales have got to be considered disappointing, considering this is a line-wide kind of event that's been going on. Of course, we know this is all leading up to Death Metal. Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo. I have no doubts that is going to be a big hit. Fans are going to like it. But right around the corner is 5G. It's a lot of change. Are DC fans just sticking around for this event so they can have a good jumping off point?
Some are, I think. I mean, it's all going to be art. Well, DC fans some of them will jump off after Death Metal if there's not a compelling story to move to. And I think this isn't any kind of new story. Anytime there's a big moment in time, whether it's a crisis or identity crisis or one of the other crises, or, believe it or not, there are people after Blackest Night who said, once this is done, I'm jumping off, because there wasn't something compelling at that moment after. And then DC wound up, baiting the hook and getting people interested in what came next. It's all going to be what happens. The one thing about collectors is they tend to be noisy. They tend to threaten, some level of self-cancelization. It's like cancel culture in a way, but it is they want to kind of say they're going to leave. But then when the time comes, they look at their big run of Superman or Batman or whatever it happens to be, and they just keep buying. And I don't think that's necessarily a healthy thing. I don't think you should have hostage customers. But I do think that there's a little bit of kind of outrage that occurs that doesn't ever translate into actually people jumping off. But my prediction is after Death Metal, DC will have some things out there that will interest fans. 5G as it currently stands is not going to do it. But if suddenly 5G comes out and says, oh, by the way, here's Jonathan Kent. We're going to do 6 issues of Jonathan Kent, and it's going to have, Scott Snyder writing it and Jim Lee drawing it, and it's going to be the adventures of what his future would look like before we go back to Superman. I guarantee you that book's going to sell great. People, 5G, there's a lot of anxiety about what it might be, and it might suck. Don't get me wrong. Convergence certainly did not do well, but Convergence also got us the restoration of the Superman family with John and all the rest that people did like. So there were good things that came out of it. 5G, if they have good art talent and the stories seem compelling, people will be there. And if they don't, they will jump off.
Yeah, it just feels like DC is in a moment where either they're gonna seize it and make something great out of it, or they're gonna have to take a couple steps back and regroup and really figure out who they want to be going forward.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that there's kind of 3 possibilities. Either they knock it out of the park, Death Metal is great, 5G winds up hooking people because it looks really compelling, and their business grows. I think the odds of that happening are very low. On the other end of the spectrum, the 5G comes out, it's a dud. Death Metal didn't end well. People didn't really care for it. Half their market share disappears, and the company's in flames and on the chopping block. I don't think that's going to happen either. The biggest, most likely scenario is that Death Metal comes out, people like it. There's some confusion within the company. 5G winds up looking a lot like Convergence, where people are kind of wondering what happens next. And DC editorial and people, like you say, have to regroup. They have to come back and say, okay, what's our core? What are the books we're going to do? Do we want to do a rebirth, or what does it look like? And I think those decisions get made pretty fast. In fact, I would guess that the whatever else, this restructuring, happens by summer within DC, not necessarily the customers.
So let's talk about my 5th development, worth keeping an eye on in 2020. Will streaming deals continue luring name talents away from the big 2 in the comic industry in general? With Miller World over at Netflix, That's a huge deal. It's something that other creators should be looking for as an opportunity or something they want. We know that Rick Remender has already signed a developmental deal. We know Ed Brubaker has a developmental deal that allows him to do Image Comics as well. Scott Snyder and Charles Soule have Undiscovered Country that looks like it's going to be going to streaming. If these deals end up being, very fruitful and the artists or the creators are able to make a good amount of money, I can see potentially a lot of big name talents kind of transitioning or attempting to transition over to the streaming platforms. And maybe we see even more of this, what I call Bendis speak, decompressed storytelling that more fits in line with streaming television.
Yeah, I completely think we're going to see more of it. I think that the model is getting established with the streaming company. In particular, you got Netflix, you got Prime, and those two are driving a lot of kind of how the streaming is going to work. Now, the interesting thing is, I think that at some point, Warner, with their system and their partnership with HBO and AT&T and everything, and Disney Plus, they need content as well. I mean, Disney has to gain a ridiculous amount of subscribers over the next year to meet the expectations they've set. Now, we're seeing rumblings at Disney that they are not producing series fast enough, and they're not. My kids love Disney Plus because it's a bunch of cartoons that appeal to a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. But in terms of actual new streaming content, since The Mandalorian, there's been nothing. I mean, very, very little in terms of this kind of material. We're told to wait for Falcon and Winter Soldier sometime in the summer. I mean, just the gap is too long. Meanwhile, Netflix has given some public statements saying, we need to actually up our game where we're putting out a major series every 1 to 2 weeks. And this space is being underserved. And if you see the spike of viewership around things like The Witcher and shows like that, there's not enough content making its way. So the door is wide open for talents to come in. I think you're going to see not only more talent happen and that model kind of get structured, you're also going to see Marvel and AT&T, or Disney and AT&T by their nature, have to start to look at what these others are doing and copy it.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I hope we don't lose all of our named talents, but darn it, I do want them to get great opportunities and get some paychecks deserving of the amazing creative talents that we do have here in the comic book industry. I think that we sometimes don't appreciate just how wonderful some of these creators really are.
I agree completely.
So my last development to watch in 2020, some people might disagree with me, but what kind of innovation is going to come from the startup from Dinesh Shamdasani and Warren Simmons with Bad Idea? They're doing something that's, it's completely different. It's limited shipping because they're going to be distributing the book, through non-traditional means. It's not going to be going through Diamond. They're doing their own thing. And I cannot wait to see what they're going to do. And maybe if this is something that maybe other indie publishers or even the big two eventually can emulate, maybe we can get through or get around some of these issues that we've had with Diamond and maybe get some competition in the industry.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So down at Comic Pro, there was a lot of buzz about this. And the way people view this and the way I view it is that Bad Idea is basically saying, they're not saying out loud, that they can't compete with the mass blitz distribution of a DC and a Marvel. And no indie can. And they're recognizing that up front. So they're saying, rather than play that game, we're going to do a different game. And our game is going to be to lean into the collector market, make these comics hard to find, make them so you have to, your store should want to get them, put some rarity to these books. And that's what they've done. To some extent, this is a marketing a trick, if you will, because they've widened the amount of shops that can get the comics. So when all is said and done, this comic launches in May, I'm fairly certain. When all is said and done, my guess is they will open the door to every shop that wants it. But by creating this initial demand for it, they're saying, we care about the collector market. We care about, what this means to customers. And I think that it's going to put a new focus on that. They're not doing trades. They're not doing digital. They're saying we're squarely going to focus on floppies and collector, and, make stores really, really want it, really beg for it to some extent. And by extension, then make the readers beg for it. And it's smart. They can't, Marvel and DC cannot attempt the same things by their business model. So it's allowing them to play a very different game. It's allowing them to step very simply into a non-Diamond world and get their kind of feet under them before they do more of it. So I think it's clever, and I think a lot of other startups and small companies should try the same. If you go in and you work with Diamond as a tiny company, I think you're putting yourself in a giant disadvantage, because you're forced to then compete with Marvel and DC, which you can't.
So I got to ask you, Perch, I know you were at Comic Pro. Do we have any idea of what this, prestige format that they're going to be using? Does that just mean it's going to be a little bit bigger? Is it the quality is going to be better? Is the page count going to be more? Is it all of the above?
I heard page quality. I heard page count. I heard cover stock. I heard none of this officially. This is what people were saying from their sources. I don't know if those sources are accurate or not. But I mean, it's going to be just some level of format. I didn't hear anybody talk about book size, and for a long time that was just a taboo subject. But mainly because Diamond didn't necessarily like it, but Black Label shattered that to some extent. And if you're not dealing with Diamond, then different size is good. I think there's a lot of ideas out there for a while that fans would reject anything that was outside of a standard comic size, because that's just how they were equipped to store them and keep them and everything else. But Black Label kind of changed that. So I'm hearing page, I'm hearing cover, I'm hearing the quality of what's going to be inside is going to be really solid. So I'm curious what they do. I'm mostly interested to see how they expand. They already broadened their shops a little bit, and they set up a kind of a lottery type system for shops to opt in to carrying their books. It's clever to get shops to kind of fight a little bit to get your books. They need shops to start ordering direct. You've seen this with Alterna and Peter Simeti. That's what everybody, all the small guys would like to do, but the logistics of getting a shop to do that are very hard. So Bad Idea has basically said, oh man, you may not even get in the party at all. So they're giving that incentive to go through that work. It's an interesting trick. I think it's a clever one.
Those are my 6 most interesting developments in the comic book industry to watch for in 2020. Thank you so much for providing some clarity and your thoughts on these. Was there something that I missed out there that you think is just really interesting that we should cover here real quick before we wrap this up?
Well, two quick things I think people should keep their eye on. Number one, and I mentioned this to you before, where's Kevin Feige? He took over Marvel and had more direct control of publishing. When are we going to start to feel those effects? Since that press release, a lot of people freaked out. There were a million videos made, lots of interest, and then it's been quiet. So what's happening? Is he ignoring it, or is he doing something behind the scenes, or when does that really start to shake things up, or will it? I think that's something to watch this year. The other is, at Comic Pro, I wasn't present for it, but a lot of people were talking about it afterward, this keynote speech around kind of cancel culture, and maybe we should stop trying to get things off the shelf and stop being so aggressive about, what's a good comic, what's a bad comic, what can we take criticism. It's one of the first times at a show a major, figure who's not a retailer, somebody who's in the industry, has said, hey, maybe everybody's getting way too worked up about politics and personal views, both directions, and why aren't we enjoying the comics? Why are you so fixated on what this creator said or what this fan said? I mean, the important thing to note is the message got out to everybody was, why are people trying to go after YouTubers when the comic industry needs writers and attention? Why are we wasting our time with that? That's interesting. The fact that people are now starting to say that out loud means maybe some of this focus goes away from the nonsense and back to the comics. I'm hoping that's a big story in 2020.
I'm glad that you brought that up, and it sounds like maybe in a couple of days, you and I are going to get together again, and we're going to talk about maybe some of the buzz and information coming out of Comic Pro as well.
Yep, absolutely. Let's do that.
All right. Thank you very much for joining me today, Perch. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.